Трябва да повъртам зум.
И нова зум трябва да има.
Да.
Че закъснем.
Каснем и това как. Защо се овие корумпирани?
Да.
Ама не сме да не гледат.
Что вы работаете? Сяду. Всякий. Не, все, сам секунду, дай.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I have a quick announcement. I am looking for Hannah Nurmi and Nina Ugwa. If you are here, can you come please see me because we need to upload your presentation next door. Hi, Adriano. So I'm looking for Hannah Nurmi and Nina Ugwa.
Пуштете го овој Good morning, dear colleagues. Dear colleagues, dear professors, researchers, students, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the organizing committee, it's a great pleasure to welcome you on the 55th Congress of International Society of Applied Ethology in Ohrid. Thank you. For the first time, the ISAE Congress is organized in Southeast Europe in Balkan region, where countries have acquired high level of expertise in science and especially in applied ethology. Gathering the best world scientists in the field of animal behavior should have great impact on promoting the animal science, animal behavior and welfare science in the Balkan region, but also to extend the presence of ISAE organization in this region. Ladies and gentlemen, the ISAE has a special focus on supporting developing countries through a number of activities with helping to build up a solid body of well-trained experts. This conference is also in this direction because up to now we have 334 participants registered from 50 countries. 100 of these participants are online, and I would like to say hello to all of them, and 234 participants with physical presence. The key role of this worldwide diversity of participants is to make applied ethology available to wider scientific community. As a scientist from the Balkan region, I can say that we are looking forward to collaborate with such a big international scientific community, because I believe that we are sharing a common goal concerning the science as an example to transparency, openness, integrity, and opportunity. This year, the conference is taking place in Ohrid. Ohrid is a city with a rich history and natural beauty. Ohrid has always been center of education. Ohrid Literary School was founded from St. Clement and St. Naum in 9th century. And this school was recognized as the oldest Slavic university, and we are considering that this university was even older than Bologna University. With this historical heritage, it's a good example that spreading of knowledge, new challenges, and way of thinking has a strong tradition in this city and in this region. We believe that this conference will be seen in this context as well. We will have opportunity to visit the churches and tombs where these patrons of Slavic literacy and education are buried. The Congress theme is animal behavior and beyond. This Congress theme is also reflected on the Congress logo, which represents a stylized display of the fresco of St. Naum. According to the legend, one of the miracles of St. Naum was that he helped a farmer to finish the work on his land by putting the wild bear, which has eaten one of his oxes, to safely yoke to the plough right next to the other ox. So the plowman tilled the field with the ox and the bear yoked next to each other. This story and the Congress logo are illustrating a holistic approach and its impact through the interaction among humans, animals, and the environment. Also, you're going to have a chance to visit the tomb and church of this saint. But also, in our social program, we are trying to include the different aspects of cultural living in the Balkan and influence on the different nations living together. Food is a special part of our cultural tradition, and we hope in the social program we capture some of these aspects. In this direction, we hope that the Congress gift will remain in your food memories. Concerning the scientific program, we accept 228 papers to be included in proceedings. The program is designed with the Woodgush lectures, 4 plenary lectures, 104 short oral presentations, 124 posters, 4 workshops, and everything is designed in 11 parallel sessions. Actually, all members of the International Scientific Committee, the reviewers, collaborations, partners, we would like to thank for their tremendous effort to create outstanding scientific program. Last but not least, my deepest gratitude goes to the institution, companies, and volunteers who have directly and indirectly supported the organization of this conference. Special thanks goes to Susan Weidbringer, because without her help, this event was not be possible to be organized. At the end, I would like, it's a great honor, again, to say that it's a great honor to hosting you on the Lake Ohrid, UNESCO Protected Natural World Heritage, and we hope that you will enjoy every moment and have a beautiful and forgettable memories. Thank you very much.
Right, there we go, we've got my slides. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Mark Rutter and I am the ISAE president. My term of office started a year ago, and as long as you continue to vote me in at the AGM, I'll be president for another year. So it's probably a bit of an understatement to say that 2020 and 2021 were difficult years. The pandemic has impacted all of our lives, but that includes the ISAE's main activity, which are our meetings. So we did a pretty good job, I think, of moving online, but it has been difficult. But here we are, we're back, we're face to face, and I think we're all quite pleased to actually get to meet each other again after such a long time. But we also need to learn from some of the good sides of having a virtual meeting. So this is our first hybrid meeting. So hello to those of you on Zoom. I'm not sure which camera I'm looking at, but hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully it's all going well from that end. Post a message if not. I'm sure we'll have some feedback if there are problems. And I'll talk a bit more about why our virtual meeting is important in a moment. But it's been a long time since we met, so I suspect quite a few of you, this is your first face-to-face ISAE International Congress. So hands up if this is your first meeting. So I thought it would be about half of you. It might even be a little bit more. So we all have to start somewhere. So who is this? Right, that's the easy question. If none of you have figured out who it is, then it's obviously me. When was the photograph taken? This is a slightly more difficult question. Clearly it's after the invention of Kodachrome color photography in the 1930s. But does anyone have any idea when? I'm going to give you a clue. I look like I'm 12. I'm actually 25. This was the second year of my PhD. The hair might give you, well, for a start, I had hair, okay? I've not always been quite so challenged. So the hairstyle might give you a clue. It was actually 1988. That was 34 years ago. So the final question as to where. So this is for the real ISAE history buffs. My first meeting was in Sweden. Good. So we've got some of the ISAE history buffs in the room as well. So we've had I had this first meeting. This is now my 26th Congress. I've only missed 9 of them. So why is it that I've kept coming back to the ISAE? What is it that's drawn me back? Great science. We've got a great program. We're going to have some great science. But also the ISAE is a friendly society. And this is probably the most important thing I want to get across. For those of you that might have forgotten, for those of you that are new, we are a friendly society. So we're a group of friends, and what do friends do? When we disagree, as scientists, we have to disagree. That's the way we have the quality control. But when we disagree, we do it in a constructive and supportive way, okay? So please bear that in mind, and we're particularly constructive and supportive to our students. So, silverbacks, those grumpy old professors, don't pick on the students, okay? You might have had a bad day, don't pick on the students. But actually, it's also those aspiring silverbacks, the postdocs who have got a point to make. They need to make their presence felt. Don't pick on the students, pick on the silverbacks, okay? The silverbacks are there for you to practice your fighting, okay? But also to both the silverbacks and the aspiring silverbacks, when the students, if a student is hovering, they want to talk to you. We haven't seen each other for 3 years. We're too engaged. A student is hovering. Please keep an eye open for that, and please talk to the students and do it in a constructive way. Right, so we've been a family for, I've been part of this family for 34 years. Some things have changed. So the meeting at SCARA was predominantly farm animal welfare, farm animal presentations. We now include companion zoo, lab and wild animals. We also have a much broader membership, activities very much beyond Europe. It's great to see that. But also a more recent challenge are concerns over climate change. So I think applied ethology has got a big role to play in making the world more sustainable. But we also need to try and make sure that our activities, we should try and do those to try and minimize our own carbon footprint. So this slide is from the closing presentation for the last virtual Congress, just highlighting that flying has this disproportionately high carbon footprint, and encouraging you to think about traveling by rail, especially international rail, which has a really low carbon footprint per kilometer, passenger kilometer. Half of our members come from Europe, so I've laid down a challenge. Can you get to Ohrid without flying? So Ohrid is a beautiful place. Some of the world's most beautiful places are not always easy to get to, and it's not always been easy to get even with flying. However, we're in a fantastic location. We've got some beautiful surroundings. I think it was worth the effort, and I put in quite an effort to get here. So I thought I should actually go by my own, my own suggestions. So we've spent 4 days getting down here on the train, but really made a holiday out of it. So a night in Paris, night in Milan, night in Matera, and then into Albania, an electric taxi from Durrës. Thank you for the organizers for laying that on. Albania, how many people know that Albania is really the third best country in Europe in terms of green energy? So Norway is number 1, Iceland is number 2. Hydropower in Albania accounts for something like 90% of their electricity generation. So that really was a green taxi. Well done for, for laying on the green taxi. There are other ways that we can reduce our carbon footprint. So I've created about 100 kilograms of CO2 getting here. Had I flown, it would be close to 700. So I've saved over half a ton. For those of you joining online, your footprint is virtually zero. This is one of the reasons why we want to try and get this hybrid conference working. Please do bear with us. This is the first time we've done this. I'm telling you now, it won't be perfect, okay? We will have some issues. We're going to try some different issues, possibly around supporting the chair. So please bear with us. Please have patience. Please have patience online. We want to get this right, but it will take some time. The other important thing why we're keen to continue with hybrid meetings or continue with that virtual component is they're far more inclusive. So if you're from a country where you're going to struggle to pay for the airfare, the accommodation, we still want you to engage with a society. So we think it's a lot more inclusive. And also to this end, we have got one way to reduce the amount of travel we do is to have joint meetings. We haven't quite got a joint meeting here, but we do have this joint session. So we're actually going to be dialing into Porto. They're going to be dialing into us. Again, bear with us. We're not sure whether it's going to work. It won't be perfect, but I'm sure it'll be a very interesting exchange. And again, we're sort of keen to not only extend our interactions with members in new countries, but with these other organizations. And I'll talk more about that in the closing ceremony. So I think the organizers have done a fantastic job putting things together. Just to recognize they had some support. So the final thing, the one thing I need to do is to declare the 55th Congress of the ISAE open. And we have a short piece of music.
I know what is coming. Dear friend, dear colleagues, I want to express my gratitude that we are hosting this meeting. It's really a great pleasure, challenge, and great to see you all after a couple of years of distancing and everything. And this would be probably for most of you the first time to see each other in physical presence, although we don't forget the online activities. And also this is a great pleasure to be for the first time to have this hybrid approach in the conference. We will see how it will go. Hopefully it will go good at least. Just to be short, just brief informations about how the things are organized. So this is the internet connection that will work all over the place here at the ground floor. Just keep in mind that all registered participants are also active online. So I would also invite all that are here to be present, to participate online. That's why you can use this access and use Zoom to participate at the Zoom, at the conference halls and activities that are happening online. So I'm inviting you to do that. We have two conference halls, like just how we have it here. One is this place, the other place is called Labino, and it's at the other end of this hall. We don't forget, please, the poster rooms. Poster rooms are next to the conference halls. We have two poster rooms. We set it like that. So just to go for the coffee break, go out, because the coffee break would be outside at the terrace. Use that places to go out to the coffee. At least you can see the posters of the authors that are presenting their work. I would also like to mention that today we will put it outside the list of the departure list. That don't means that we want to go now to departure, but in order to be prepared. So we will put that in the board. Please check it, and if you have any remarks or want different different arrangements, just tell that to the registration desk. I have something about eating with ethologists to announce. That will happen during the lunch, and everybody who was registered received a badge and a table number. So, and it is also printed at the registration desk. So please find your number at the table and participate to that. I think I presented correctly. Yeah, thanks. So sorry if something is missing, but all the people, everything you need, you can ask me, Vlatko, or the volunteers that are present everywhere, and they are with white shirts with the logo of the conference. So I don't think that I took a lot of time. So yes, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Welcome. My name is Beate Nilsson from U4, and I am chairing this first session. I'm sure they've made me chair just so everything that can go wrong probably will go wrong. We are starting with an introduction to David Woodgosh, whose memorial lecture will follow. And that will be given by Alistair Lawrence. I believe that is a recorded talk. So I will hand over to the technical team to put on Alistair Lawrence, David Woodgosh, Life and Impact on Applied Animal Behavior Science.
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry, not entirely sure what's happening. Should I start?
We can't hear you.
You can't hear me. I'm unmuted. Hello? Hello, can you hear? You can hear me online, okay. But I'm not sure whether I'm live. There. I don't know what to do. Hello? Sorry, what's happening?
We can now hear you, Alistair. So
You can,
we can,
you-
yes.
you can hear me.
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, so I can start.
Please start.
And should I share my screen for my slides here? Yes, probably is the answer to that.
Yes, you
Is
should.
that- Right. Okay. Just a sec. Sorry. I need to turn off my transcript. Just a sec. Stop sharing. Just a sec. Should have done it before. Okay, I'm hoping that you can hear me, and I guess somehow this is getting to you. I'm very sorry not to be there with you today. It looks absolutely lovely, and I'm sure you're going to have a fantastic time. So I've just been asked to give a very brief introduction to David Woodgush. It's an important year for remembering David. It's 100 years approximately since his birth, and it's close to 30 years since he suddenly died, actually on his way to an SVE conference in London. And in this short presentation, I want to remind us why we celebrate David Woodgush with a memorial lecture. And I also want to try and give some idea of David as he was, as a scientist, as a teacher, and as an individual, as a person, because of course, many of you will not have had the chance to meet David, and believe me, he was very much worth meeting. So David had a really quite fascinating family history background. His grandfather, Richard Gush, was a Quaker who settled in South Africa. And he's actually quite famous because he intervened between some local Zulu tribesmen or people and his own village, and he probably ended up saving a lot of lives. And in fact, he has a play in a film in his name, as you can see. So David was born in Transkei in 1922. And skipping forward, probably one of the most significant parts of his early life was that he lost his lower left arm in an accident in World War II. And this photograph you're seeing to the right, he's standing between Candace Curry and also the far side, J.P. Signoret, a famous French reproductive biologist. But I'm showing the slide or this photograph really because you can see his left arm in a sling. And this was just the way David was ever since I knew him. And often you would see him grimace. Clearly, he suffered phantom pain throughout his life after his injury, but he never really complained. It was just part of him. He came to Edinburgh. I think he was very anti-apartheid. He came to Edinburgh to study genetics and went on to study for his PhD, the population genetics of the woodlouse. And almost immediately, he was offered to head up a new ethology department at what was then the Poultry Research Centre. So David, as a scientist, I'm showing you this picture, which is from a very early SVE meeting in Edinburgh. I love this photograph, mainly because everyone seems to be just having a fantastic time. They seem to be very happy. And if we zoom in, I'm doing this because we can get a sense of that fantastic smile. I would say that famous smile that David had, which was just so warming. You just look at that and it makes you feel good. And that's how I like to remember him. So here we have another photograph of David. It's the same conference as the one where I showed you with J.P. Signoret, and this is in fact Signoret introducing the conference in 1983 in Tours, and David in the front row with actually some rather trendy looking glasses. David started off as a reproductive, his interest in behavior came through his studies of reproductive behavior, or sorry, physiology in poultry. When Animal Machines was published, written by Ruth Harrison, that of course stimulated the Bramble Committee, and that got him interested in animal welfare. And that led to the setting up of this ethology group at the Poultry Research Centre. And you're seeing here an early photograph of Ian Duncan, who was one of his first PhD students there. And following on from David, Ian, of course, many others came to join, Barry Hughes, Brian Jones, John Savory, and others, Mike Gentle. And another honour that was placed on David was that he was an early non-veterinary member of the Society for Veterinary Ethology. Now, David was a prolific producer of papers. At the time of his death, I think it was calculated he had over 200 articles. And it was said then that he had published more articles in the journal Animal Behaviour than any other author. Perhaps one of his most famous pieces of work was the Edinburgh Pig Park and Family Pen System, which he worked on with Alex Stauber, Ruth Newbury, or Ruth Hutton, Heidi Moser, Sheila Kerr, and a very young Per Jensen turned up at one point to study for his PhD. And you're seeing here photographs of the pig park. Just to remind you, this was an experiment releasing intensively kept pigs into an area of the Pentland Hills. And you're seeing here examples of the behavior which these pigs expressed, very close to the behavior of wild boar, nesting behavior, foraging and rooting, and general destruction of the environment. No, well, marking behavior. And this contributed to understanding the behavioral effects of domestication, and also very importantly, to a very active debate on behavioral needs stimulated by the Bramble Committee and their freedom to behave normally. And David as a teacher, well, he left the PRC in 1978 and went to the University of Edinburgh School of Agriculture, where he began teaching animal behavior and welfare to agriculture and veterinary students. And they received very little of this at the time. So he again was leading the way in this. But probably his most significant contribution to teaching was setting up the MSc in Applied Animal Behavior and Welfare. And just last year, we celebrated 30 years of this course. And this was a really interesting day. It was curtailed by the pandemic, but we heard virtually from various students who are now active in animal behavior, all sorts of animal behavior and welfare in all sorts of important and interesting ways. And somewhere between 700 and 800 students have graduated through this program at this point. Now, for this presentation, I went into my archive being a set of plastic boxes in our garage. And I had to lift a lot of them to get to the bottom one. And here I found this file, this folder full of material from the setting up of the MSc by David Woodgush. And here is the original course content. And one of the interesting and important things here, of course, is that ethology was essentially the backbone of this proposed course. And another thing I found in the course, when I flipped over that piece of paper I just showed you, I found this note on an advanced course or an advanced aspect of the course. And there's no detail here, but I did find this piece of paper, which is written in David's very distinctive handwriting. And this was his plan for this advanced course. And you can see here the use of choice experiments to understand behavioral needs and potentially animal suffering. But you can also see typically him looking ahead to self-awareness. And we have for many years had Francois Wiemelsfelder teach consciousness and self-awareness on the course, and cognition, which of course has become such an important part of our field. So David again was looking ahead, and indeed, I think looking at this backbone of this course that he envisaged is pretty much what we teach in the present day. And I'd lastly like to make reference to David as an inspiration. I've listed here virtually everybody I could find who'd published with him. It's a long list, and there's some very well-known names there. David was the original networker. I can see him at an SVE or ISAE meeting, SVE meeting, sitting late into the day or night, talking to PhD students about some interesting idea. He was so ahead of his time that it didn't always work. His work with John Edison and Rob Mutzelfeld was effectively an early PLF attempt to record automatically sheep behavior. And if you talk to John, it didn't exactly go well. But then you have to take risks. And with someone like David, who was always looking ahead, that was part of his way of being. So he was an inspiration and a trailblazer. When he died, a small group of us thought it would be important to mark his legacy. So we set up the David Woodgush Memorial Fund. We asked for contributions, and for that time, we gathered quite a lot of money, which is still supporting the Woodgush lecture, which we're about to shortly hear. And very recently, Birta Nielsen helped in the movement of that fund from the University of Edinburgh to the ISAE. So the fund will support the Woodgush lecture in perpetuity. If you want to read more about David, then I can pass you on this obituary, which was written by his great friend, Aubrey Manning. Aubrey, unfortunately, recently passed away as well. I just wanted to make reference to what great friends they were and what a joy it was to be with them as they talked about famous names in behavior and welfare and laughed. They had great laughs, both of them. And Vicky Sandilands has written this very nice biography of David Woodgush as an ethology mentor as well. So just to finish up, thanks to both Mike Appleby, who gave me these slides, which is his history of SVE and ISAE, and also to Ruth Newbury, who I think may be with you, who also lent me some slides recently, and I've used some of her pictures. And yes, just that's me finished. I'm looking forward very much to listening to the Woodgush lecture by Friederike. I can tell you that David would have very much enjoyed this as well. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this. There's something happening. Thank you very much for this introduction to David Woodgush, his life. And I will now hand over to Friederike Range to give this year's Woodgush Memorial Lecture.
Morning, everybody. Can you hear me already? Good. I'm very honored to be here. I was really happy about this invitation and giving such a honored talk here today. So I was a bit nervous. I got even more nervous because we realized that there were some problems with the videos. So we had to switch computers. So I hope everything will work. But I was told here in the Balkan, so things will work eventually. So I hope it's going to work. I was here actually 37 years ago with my family, and the thing that I remember from the Ohrid lake is that we were fishing small fishes with glasses, so they told us to make holes into them and fish and things. So it was a really nice memory. But I've changed since then. I'm not working on fishes anymore, but I'm working on bigger animals.
Friederike, you need to use the microphone so the online
okay.
people can hear. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. So I've changed. I'm not working with fishes anymore, but I'm working with canines, so wolves and dogs mainly. And I'm going to try to share this thing now. No. I'm not trying to share it now.
It doesn't.
So while they're trying to figure out the computer, I can just tell you a little bit about the research that we have been doing.
Thanks,
so
Ruby.
basically, we're working on wolves and dogs, and the main interest that we have is trying to understand the effects of domestication. So what happened during domestication? The lecture I'm going to give today eventually will be mainly about the interactions towards humans. We have also done a lot of studies on conspecific interactions, so how the wolves interact with each other and how that differs from dog-dog interactions, but this will not be the focus today. But let's see if something happens. So I guess it's the sharing of the first session that's really a problem. So I can just tell you a little bit more. Just a bit of chit chatting, I guess. So I just tell you a bit about our research. So we have mainly worked at the Wolf Science Center, where we actually raise wolves and dogs in the same way. So we basically control a bit for the differences in life experience, of course, and I will talk a bit more about it in the lecture. But we recently also started to set up field sites. So we are working in Morocco with free-ranging dogs. Which is really exciting. There are about 200 to 300 dogs in the area where we work. They're all free ranging and they form their own social system. And we are trying to figure out at the moment how that actually looks like, because it's going to be really important to understand dog behavior in the end. So these animals, they either form small groups or some of them just roam around, and we try to figure out why they some behave like that and others differently. So we are working together with the genetists to really try to figure these things out. We also started to work on social learning there, so how the animals actually learn from humans, even though they are not really socialized with humans. But we also tried to understand the domestication syndrome, where there's been a lot of talk about that, right? That yes, we are all convinced how this domestication syndrome works, but there's actually very little data on it. So we're going to try to look into that in more detail. And another field research that we set up a site is in Italy, actually, where we study free-ranging wolves now. And this is really exciting as well, because so there the main question is really if the wolves that live closer to humans, so closer to cities, whether they behave differently than those that are more that are further apart from the cities. And this could really mimic a little bit the domestication process, right? Because I mean, this is what we think how domestication started, that some of the wolves came closer to the human environment. And we're doing this research with camera traps. So we have locations where we set up these cameras, and then we put out little objects, or we play back human voices, and we then can see on these videos how the animals behave. And interestingly, we don't see just wolves, but we also see wild boar and lots of foxes that are interested, and sometimes even horses. So they in Tuscany, they also have free-ranging horses. So we're doing quite a lot of things at the moment, and we're always looking for students and interested postdocs. So if you want, you can check our web pages. There should be two new announcements for PhD positions actually out rather soon. So if you're interested in that, you're welcome to check. Yes.
I'm sort of wondering whether we could swap the coffee break for this so that you have a bit more time to get it working, or are we just about to? Is the coffee ready? Okay. Does anyone know if coffee is ready now so we can swap it around? No, it's not. No, it's not. Stay put. Friederike, can you tell us a bit more about what the domestication syndrome is for people who don't know what that means?
Yes, so basically it's a domestication, oh, well. So let's try. I'm a Mac user, so I'm going to try with a PC now. And the views actually are not working here. So I will switch back and forward a little bit because I think that the videos are really telling very often. So I think it would be a shame not to show them. I don't have all of them, but I hope you bear with me. So anyhow, I'm going to talk about wolf-dog differences, and it's actually not that simple. And as I said, I will really concentrate a bit about their interactions with humans rather than with conspecifics, because I really thought this is better for this conference, for the theme of the conference. So, okay. So yes, dogs are very cooperative with humans, and we think this is actually due to domestication, so an adaptation to the human environment. So basically what happened during the domestication process, right, that in the beginning, some wolves, they were living closer to humans because there might have been resources. And then humans probably also selected for animals that weren't so aggressive towards them and not so afraid of them. So something must have happened there. And through a process, we actually got the dog that we have today. Oops. So actually what we are interested in is really what changed during this process. It's a process, it's not an event, but it's really a long process. And there's been different ideas about that. And I think one of the main ideas is that there was really a selection for decreased aggression, which that in turn led to higher sociability and also probably an enhancement of cognitive abilities. So if we take this, we would expect that actually dogs show increased aggression compared to wolves. They should seek out and interact more with humans than wolves. And they should outperform wolves when cooperating or communicating with humans. So we can test that. This is the nice thing about this hypothesis, right? Hypotheses are always good if you can test them. So we can have very clear predictions and can go out and test them. But you have to think about actually which populations do we compare with each other. So which populations of dogs and wolves do we actually use for these comparisons? And for this, I would like to take you one step back. So this is a schematic of the domestication process. We have the common ancestor on the top. And then there was some selection pressures, probably both natural and sexual selection pressures, as well as selection pressures by human for certain abilities of the animals or certain behaviors of the animals. And what we find then are the present wolves today and the present free-ranging dogs. And this is really important to keep that in mind. So this is the initial domestication process. And as you can see on the graphic, we have some bottlenecks there as well. So the genetic diversity actually decreased from the common ancestor to the wolves that we have today and the dogs that we have today. What's important, however, to also realize is that after this initial domestication process, we have the breed selection process. And here we really have a huge or very huge bottlenecks. So very often only a few animals were used for this breed selection. And so the genetic diversity really decreased again. And we selected for very, very specific traits and with just a few animals. So if we want to understand really what the initial domestication process is about, we should really think about which animals to compare with each other. We cannot go back to the common ancestor, of course, so we have to use the wolves today, but we should also be aware that these wolves went through specific selection pressures. So also these animals, they were hunted, which they weren't before, right? So they probably are more fearful today than they were when the domestication process started. And the dogs, of course, also, I mean, even though there was not the breed selection in the beginning, humans probably killed off the animals that were very aggressive, but the dogs also changed their behavior because they started to use a different niche than the wolves. So they became scavengers and really the whole behavior changed. So keeping this in mind, another aspect that we have to pay attention to when we compare these animals with each other is that they actually have more or less similar experiences. Because if the life experience is different, then the question is, what do we compare? definitely we cannot say anything about genetics then. Because, I mean, if you have a wolf that is living in a game park, has never an access to humans, we cannot really compare it with a pet dog. Because a pet dog, I mean, it's 24 hours with us at home. It has completely different experiences. We also cannot really compare the free-ranging dogs with free-ranging wolves, because even the free-ranging dogs have different experiences with humans. So we really have to be careful what we compare so that we don't compare apples with pears. So this is something that really has to be kept in mind. Also for all other comparisons in animal species, it's something really, really, really important. And I'm very often surprised how many people actually forget about that. At the Wolf Science, so there are basically two projects who really took this seriously and have tried to equalize the experience that these animals have. One is the Wolf Science Center that we set up with Kurt Kottritschall, Shofi Virani, and myself. And what we have here is wolves. These are American wolves and mongrels. So really street dogs that are not mixed breed dogs, but these are really street dogs. They are very similar to the free-ranging dogs genetically. And we hand raise them because wolves are really afraid of humans when they're not hand raised. So we take away the fear of humans so that we can really see how they interact with us if they're not afraid of us. And we do exactly the same thing with the dogs. So they're hand raised and they are raised in peer groups. So together with other wolves or other dogs. So we don't mix them up. It's 1 year we breed the dogs and 1 year the wolves. And what's also important is that we have just two animals from the same litter. So we have quite a lot of different genetic lines in there. So it's not just, we're not just talking about one family, but we're really talking about genetic and different genetic lines, both for the dogs and the wolves. Once they are about 4 to 5 months old, they're integrated into packs with adult animals, and then they live in enclosures, and the humans come and do the testing with them once a day or several times a day, depending on the schedules. So these animals are highly socialized, both with humans as well as with conspecifics. And so we can test both the behavior with the human, and we can also test the behavior with conspecifics. And the dogs have exactly the same experience as the wolves. What they take out of this experience, of course, is another issue, right? It might be that the dogs react differently to some experiences, but in the end, it's a genetic difference. Another project that also did that, actually they started before us, is the Family Dog Project in Budapest. And they did it a bit differently. So they also hand raised the animals, but they kept them as pet dogs at home. So basically the wolves would go to an owner at home. And this unfortunately didn't work out for a very long time. So after 3 to 4 months, most of the wolves went back to the enclosures because it's not so nice to keep actually a wolf at home. And you hopefully at the end of the lecture, you will understand a bit more why this is the case. But also they had mongrels and they had European wolves. So there's a bit of difference here. So let's look at these different predictions that I talked about beforehand. What do we know about aggression in dogs and wolves? So first of all, when we talk about aggression, what kind of aggression do we actually talk about? So this is the first thing, right? If I talk about a general decreased aggression, I have to ask myself, there are different kinds of aggression. There's intergroup aggression. So if animals fight with each other within groups, but there's also intergroup aggression. So when they fight with other groups, and there's resource defense. So when I defend resources that I really want to have. And actually all of these different aggressions are shaped by different social ecological and artificial selection pressures. So they might be different, and their underlying hormonal mechanisms also differ. So we cannot just say everything is the same. And there's also been studies showing that they actually are independent of each other. So in dogs, for example, human-directed aggression does not necessarily mean, so if a dog is aggressive towards humans, doesn't mean necessarily that it's also aggressive towards other dogs. So there are differences, and we have to be very careful if we talk about aggression. What kind of aggression do we actually mean? So what about aggression towards humans? Unfortunately, there are not very many studies about that, and maybe it's not a big surprise, but these wolves become big, and also with big dogs. I don't know, I don't really want to get in that situation. But there have been some studies with puppies, so physical restraint tests where the animals were held, and the researchers looked how much they actually would resist against it and whether they would become aggressive towards the humans. And actually until the end, or at the age of 3 months, the wolves are more aggressive than the dogs, but this difference vanishes with a later age. In adults, there's been one study where the Budapest group actually did a threatening approach towards adult wolves and adult pet dogs. So here we have to be careful again. The owner was present. And what they found is actually that the dogs, there are several of them reacted with aggression towards this approaching stranger, whereas actually the wolves were mainly avoidant, except one who was friendly. So this doesn't tell us very much about these differences. How about resource defense towards humans? So there's been studies both at the Budapest group, and we actually repeated the same studies to have a bigger sample size. And this was throwing a ball and fetching the ball. So the animals, there was puppies, really young animals, and we wanted to see if they retrieved the ball. Not surprisingly, maybe dogs retrieved it more than the wolves. And it was easier to take the ball away from the dogs than from the wolves. So 4 of the 16 wolf puppies were actually aggressive. None of the 11 dog puppies were aggressive. However, if you know a little bit about statistics, maybe this doesn't tell us so much either, because it's really not that big difference. And actually, if we do the same test with a familiar person, so somebody they know well, one of the hand raisers, there's no difference in regard to taking away the object again. So the familiar person can take the object away from the wolf without any problem. So the relationship also matters. So there are lots of different factors that are important. What about adult animals and resource defense? So again, the Budapest group with the same animals that were tested in the threatening approach, they actually tried to figure out whether the animals would guard an object against the stranger, and whether the stranger was allowed to take the object away. And again, we have to be careful because it's pet dogs. But 6 out of 9 of the dogs actually guarded the toy. They were barking and snapping, but the stranger could take away the toy afterwards, so that wasn't a big problem. From the wolves, 5 of the 13 wolves actually guarded the toy. 2 were aggressive and 3 were friendly. But the stranger could not take the toy away, but the caretaker could, from 4 out of the 5 animals. So again, the relationship plays a big role. And here I have to say, pet dogs, I mean, I train my dog that I can take something away from them. And I mean, of course, this kind of training is usually not done with the wolves. So this is always something that you need to keep in mind, why it's so important to think about what kind of experiences they had. How about aggression against conspecifics? Here, intergroup aggression, we know actually from wolves that it's one of the highest causes of mortality. So most wolves actually die because they have conflicts with other groups. In dogs, it doesn't seem to be the case, at least in the one population where we know the aggression between groups doesn't seem to be lethal, and there seems to be very little aggression. But again, it's a sample size of 1, so we don't really know very much about this. How about intergroup aggression? So aggression within groups. There we actually have quite a few studies, both older studies also and younger studies. And here it's actually that the young wolves show a lot more aggression than a lot of different dog breeds at the same age. So that's studies from Patterson, especially, and from the Franks. When they are a bit older, wolves still, they have more frequent aggressive interactions, but actually the intensity of the aggression is usually higher in the dogs. So contact aggression, the dogs very often escalate, whereas the wolves often use aggression to communicate with each other. So you see a lot of interactions. They raise their hackers, they growl, but they don't go into contact aggression. And dogs, you very often have escalations there where they then attack. If we talk about resource defense, so we did several studies where we actually tried to figure out whether the animals would share a resource or not. And now I have to see if I can get out of here. So basically what we have here is, no. Help, help. How do I find my video box? Oh, okay, good. So anyhow, what we have is we test the animals within a pack. Oh, okay, thank you. And they have one bowl in front of them. So these are two dogs and they have a bowl. They know exactly where the food is. There's food in the bowl. And we actually look at whether they share the resource or not. So there they see that the bowl is arriving. There's food in it. And then the doors open at the same time and they come out. And you see they come together, but then actually there's a small little growl from the female and that's it. The male goes off and he's not approaching the bowl at all anymore. So in the previous, in the next sessions, he's actually not going there. He is motivated to have the food. So it's not that he's not interested in the food anymore. As you can see, as soon as she moves off, he moves in to check if something is left over, but there's nothing. So in the wolves, we ran the same test. Also male and a female, and they just eat together there and they growl, but they just feed together. So now I want to go back. Oh God. Okay, so basically what we find in this test is that the frequency of aggression is the same in wolves and dogs. But actually what we see is that the highest ranking dogs, they are much more aggressive, so they show more aggression than the subdominant dogs. And what you see as an effect is that the dominant dogs actually spend most of the time feeding on the resource. Whereas the subdominant dogs just move around and look at the resource, but don't really feed. Whereas in the wolves, there's no, actually the subordinate animals show more aggression. So this is just growling and showing, okay, I also want to have access to this resource, with the effect that both of them, the high ranking and the low ranking ones, actually feed together and they are tolerating each other. And yeah, so what we also found there again is that there's higher contact aggression in the dogs than in the wolves. So if you sum this up, then actually the picture is not that clear, right? So aggression towards humans, well, there are not so clear differences. There's also very few data, understandably. Intergroup encounters, yes, it seems that wolves are a lot more aggressive than dogs. But again, I think we need a lot more studies on free-ranging dogs to really understand this. Intergroup interactions, it seems that dogs are actually more aggressive than wolves, and it's rank dependent. So yeah, aggression. So if we talk about aggression, we have to keep in mind that it's context specific. It's mediated by the relationship that the animals have with each other. And so there's not really support for this idea of generalized decreased aggression in dogs versus wolves. So how about sociability? We did a few studies. The one is actually
pre-test for another study, but I think this is most interesting here. So whether the animals actually seek contact with a human that comes into the enclosure. The human, all it does is cuddle the animal, so they can come for cuddles or not. And what we see is that the dogs spend basically the entire time being cuddled. They really like this. The wolves like to see what's in the enclosure otherwise. So they move around and explore a bit more. They come in between, get a cuddle, but then they move off again. We also tested free-ranging dogs and pet dogs at 2 different locations, so in a care facility and in a dog park. And actually, these dogs are not all that much into being cuddled all the time. So the free-ranging dogs actually like it quite a bit, because maybe similar as the dogs at the Wolf Science Center, it's a treat. It doesn't happen so often. Whereas pet dogs in the care facility, yeah, fine, I'll still come, but actually the dogs in the dog park, there are other things to do, right? So we have to keep in mind again that the context really also matters here, how social I am and how much time I want to spend with a human or not. We then ran quite a lot of sociability tests, trying to change the relationship. So basically we had a setup where a trainer or a familiar, but not, where a familiar person came that didn't have a relationship with the animals. So they knew the person, but they really didn't interact with them. And they would greet them through the fence and cuddle them. And we would see how much time the animals actually would be cuddled in that situation from the 2 people. And again, we tested the wolves and dogs at the Wolf Science Center that have the same experience, but we also tested pet dogs. And what we found here is that the animals spent more time with the hand raiser, but there was no difference between the wolves and the dogs. However, what we also see in the graph quite clearly is there's a much higher variation in the wolves than the dogs. So it really depends on the personality of the wolf, whether they want to be petted or not. Some just are not interested, others stay there all the time. So there's a huge variation in there, whereas in the dogs, it's much less variable. And the pet dogs, there was actually no difference between the conditions. So they spent as much time with the owner as with a familiar person. What was interesting though is that we also looked at the self-directed behaviors. So basically markers for stress, right? So if they are yawning or scratching or doing things like that. So how much would we see of that? And what was surprising here is that the dogs showed a lot more of these stress-related behaviors than the wolves, both the pack dogs as well as the pet dogs. And when we look at that, how much this is the case with the familiar and the unfamiliar person, or the hand raiser and the familiar person, we see that the dogs actually show a lot more of these stress signals when they're close to the familiar person. So there was a correlation between body contact and the number of these self-directed behaviors. And it actually also was correlated with cortisol. So what does that tell us? Maybe the dogs are not that happy actually to be in contact with these people. But why do they do that then? Why are they close? Why do they come and let themselves be petted if that stresses them out? And this is really interesting, right? And something to think about. And we might find the solution or the answer to that a bit later in this talk. So to sum this up, difference and sociality are subtle and mediated by relationship strengths and experience. And actually the close contact with humans might not just be stressful for wolves who just don't come close then, but might also be stressful for the dogs. So the experience with humans influences wolves and dogs' sociability. So again, it's not we cannot just say dogs are more social than wolves. It depends on lots of different factors. So how about cognitive skills? So one of the skills that have been most promoted by all these domestication hypotheses is cooperativeness, right? Dogs are fantastic cooperative partners. They do everything with us. They are our best friends and they cooperate with us whenever. But let's think about what do we mean by cooperativeness. So if I talk about my children, they were very cooperative today. What I mean is that they really obeyed what I said, right? They did what I asked them to do. And then I say, oh, they were fantastic today. They accepted when I said no without discussion and just did what I wanted to do. So this is one of the definitions of cooperation. In biology, we usually talk about cooperation when we think about we are working together to reach a common goal. So it's more on eye level, right? So we are working together and we both get something out of it. So if we talk about dogs cooperating with humans, what do we actually mean? Which kind of definition do we use? And so I separated this here a little bit. So we looked at tractability, which is nothing else than just obeying what I want you to do. And we have started to do some tests here. And I don't think this works. No, and I don't have a video of that. So basically what we do here is we have the really young puppies, so they are 5 weeks old, and one is putting them down, the other one is calling them, and we see if they come. Okay, so very simple test. And what we find is that both at the Wolf Science Center and also in Budapest, there's really no difference between wolves and dogs. They both come, they're both successful, and the latency also doesn't matter. I mean, there are always some that move off in between, but in the end, they obey the same thing. And this is tested repeatedly over the development, both with familiar and unfamiliar partners. So we don't find a difference there. We also trained them, or we tested how they react to sit and down commands. So basically taking a food and a food piece and getting them to sit and to lie down. And again, yes, at 7 weeks, the dogs might be a little bit faster to sit than the wolves, but basically afterwards, there's no difference anymore in success or latency to sit. The dogs, however, tend to be a little bit faster in lying down, so they're more compliant here. Being restrained, so having to wear a muzzle, of course, this is always something that's also with dogs not so easy to train. But again, we found no difference here in puppy age. How about adults? So we did tests with 1.5-year-old animals. And what we see here basically on the graph is the wolf is in dark gray and the dogs in light gray. The dogs orient a bit more towards the trainer and they spend more time in proximity. But this is really, it's not much difference, it's significant. But the question is, how much is this biologically valid? If I could look 85% or 97%, yeah, we can discuss that. But the dogs actually did follow more commands and they did so faster than the wolves. So there seems to be a difference in tractability once they are a bit older. And at the moment, we are looking at the time in between to figure out when this actually changes. How about if we want to call away an animal from a resource? So this is, of course, more difficult because we have competing motivation here. And what we see here is basically we have a cage, we have food in there, the animal can sniff and figure out that there's food in there, and then we try to call them away. And the videos don't work. And what we see here is actually that the wolves spend a lot more time manipulating the cage, but nevertheless, there is actually no difference whether they come or not. So again, as puppy age, they really come and are nicely behaving. So the difference probably occurs a bit later. And so these videos I'm going to show you, even though this doesn't want to do it. So let's see if I manage. So basically what we do here is at the age of 6 months, we test out if we can defend a resource against a wolf or a dog. At the Wolf Science Center, we do not go into competition with the animals, so they don't know this experience. It's the only test that we run where we actually say no to the animals. Usually we do an exchange. Okay, if they steal something, then we give them something better and try to get it back, which usually works. but we don't train them on a no, so they don't know this. So the human can try to block the animal, but they are not allowed to hold it or anything like that. Now what you can see is, yes, the wolf is trying to get the food, but it's not getting aggressive, right? So it could have been very easy for the wolf to get this food, right? I mean, they can bite, no problem, but he decides not to do that. And none of our animals actually bit the experimenter. So they all try to get the food, but none of them really try to use what you would have expected. And I think it's because it's a relationship. So they really value the relationships they also form with the humans. So I would not advise a stranger to do that with a wolf. So how does it look with dogs? Okay, how do I get out of this again? So again, this is a dog who has exactly the same experiences as the wolves. So there's no difference in how they are raised. So for time reasons, okay. So let's try to get back here. Why does it want to go back in presentation mode? No, okay. So what we found here, basically we had three phases. So the first phase you saw now, then at the next phase, actually, the human stepped aside to give the way open for the animal, and then the human turned around before stepping back. And we see that there are quite some differences between the wolves and the dogs here. So most of the wolves actually take the meat in the first phase, and a few also in the second phase. Whereas the dogs really just, if at all, then they take it in the second phase. And most of them don't take it at all. So we were interested was what happens actually if we use free-ranging dogs for that, who don't have this experience. And, oh, sorry, again, I'll show you the video. So these animals, of course, they have some experience with humans, right? But very different again. So, oops. No, 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 no. Yeah. So of course we have to be a bit more flexible when testing free-ranging dogs, because we cannot really hold them, so we have to lure them away. They like to be petted, most of them, luckily, so this is not a problem. But of course, we cannot do it as controlled as in the lab. So very different behavior than what we see in the wolves, right? And these are free-ranging dogs. They are not socialized with humans. So she gets the food in the end. So I just
Sorry. I will manage eventually. No, I won't. Huh? Ah. No. Oh, okay. I'm used to the Macs. I'm using the keyboard differently, sorry. So with the free-ranging dogs, also none of them took it in the first phase, but a lot of them took it in the second phase. So as soon as the human moves away, they actually go and take the food. So one reason or one mechanism that could actually help the animals or the dogs to actually restrain themselves is self-control, right? How much more time actually do I have? Okay, so I have to hurry up a little bit. Okay. So basically self-control, we know it's the capacity to actually wait for a better reward. And what we usually use to test this is a delay of gratification task. So basically they have access to a low quality reward, and then if they wait, they get the high quality reward. And this is in humans, it's really related to a lot of cognitive abilities later in life. I don't show you the video now. And what we find actually with the wolves and the dogs at the Wolf Science Center is that the wolves wait less long for the better reward than the dogs. So the dogs are much, much better here. The problem with this study is that the human is facing the animals while doing the experiment. So it might be that what I showed you before, this inhibition where the dogs actually seem to be more inhibited than the wolves could actually drive this response, which is why we actually did this study also at the Clever Dog Lab with pet dogs, where we then actually had a barrier so the dogs didn't see the human when they had the choice. We tested 16 dogs and we tested them once with a quality and the ones with a quantity difference in a counterbalanced order. And what we find here is that, yes, some of the dogs can really wait a long time, but if you look at the two circles up there, half of the dogs actually in the quantity, they wait for 2 seconds max, and in the quality for 10 seconds max. So in general, the self-control of dogs is not that fantastic at the group level. There are individuals that find some ways to do it, but usually not so good. So self-controls, yes, there seems to be, or there might be actually a difference between wolves and dogs, and I wouldn't be surprised if we find that. And this actually would help them, or would help us to inhibit them, because the dogs could actually wait a bit longer. But again, we would really try to investigate this a bit more. So there are no clear difference in tractability during puppyhood, and adult dogs obey and move faster. They seem to be easier to inhibit than wolves, and they seem to have a better self-control and are more inhibited by the presence of the experimenter. So dogs are easier to inhibit control than wolves. What about working together to reach a common goal? So what we did here is a string pulling experiment. So we have a table, there are 2 strings on it, or there's 1 string on it, and the 2 partners have to pull at the same time to move the tray forward to get access to the food. And we did that with a human as a partner. And what, I'm not showing you the videos, it's going to take too long. So what we did here is basically we had a 1 tray condition where there was just 1 tray. So the animals and the human were released. Either we released them in a way that the human approached first, was there first and could choose a side, or the animal was first at the apparatus and could choose a side. And
then we ran a two-tray condition where actually they had to coordinate first to go to one apparatus and then the second. And what we found in the one-tray condition, actually, there was no difference between wolves and dogs. So they were all similar, successful to do that. However, the wolves tried more often to steal the rope from the human when the human was on the side that they actually preferred. So that was not so good. They learned that this was not a good strategy because the human then would drop the thing and would move away. So they didn't do that so much anymore during later trials, but they tried in the beginning and the dogs didn't really try that. What was more interesting though is the two apparatus condition. So here, the human was instructed to wait for 3 seconds or 5 seconds before moving from the first to the second apparatus. And we were interested in what the dogs and the wolves would actually be doing. And what you can see here on the graph is that actually the dogs, they usually wait what the human is doing and then they follow. Whereas the wolves, they move off, they wait for the human, but they initiate the movement to go to the second apparatus. So there's a difference in how they actually cooperate. They're both similar successful, so there's no difference in success, but how they get there differs. And if we look at in the situations where actually the human was leading, so then the dogs were more likely actually to follow than the wolves. So the wolves very often just ran off. So when socialized, wolves and dogs can cooperate with humans, but the cooperation style differs. So the dogs avoid conflicts with humans and follow the lead. So the cooperation with wolves is actually more on eye level. And then I'm going to just go through this. How do I get there? Oh, this doesn't work, sorry. So if we come back to our beginning, domestication is an adaptation to the human environment and which traits actually changed. So what we think is that what really changed might have been obedience and self-control in these animals. So there was a selection for differential temperament and or better self-control. At least this is what makes the most sense for us at the moment from this data. But we collected also the interspecific interactions between the wolves. They all point into that direction. And this also makes sense because what we want as a human is somebody that we can shoo away, somebody that we can control. We don't want somebody to work with us on eye level. I don't want to discuss every day whether I have access to the fridge or not. So it's really something that we probably selected for quite a bit. Whereas the other aspects, aggression, maybe we didn't select so much for it because if the dogs were aggressive towards other dogs that would come into the camp, that would be positive, right? So we have to be very careful when we think about these aspects. So, and this really helps us to live together in a good way. So the take-home message is, except of inhibition, the differences between wolves and dogs are not very pronounced, but strongly mediated by context and experience. And I urge everybody to really look carefully what they claim and what it is about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Federica. And as the bell indicates, I'm afraid we do not have time for any questions, but I'm sure you will be around. So please come and ask Federica questions in the breaks and whatever. And now there will be coffee outside somewhere, and I want to see you back here at 11 o'clock. Is that correct? Correct. Thank you.